Welcome to Intentional Divorce Insights. I'm Leah Hadley, certified divorce financial analyst, accredited financial counselor, and the founder of Intentional Divorce Solutions. I'll be your guide through the complexities of divorce, finance, and emotional wellness. Join me as we uncover practical tips and empowering insights to help you navigate your divorce with clarity and intention. Hi there, and welcome back to Intentional Divorce Insights. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today. This is Katie Wilcox Carter, who is a Virginia-based family law attorney at Hoffmeyer Family Law, where they represent women exclusively in divorce. And they are actually the only firm that I know of that does that. I imagine there's probably more out there, but that's a pretty unique place to be. Katie started her own social media, Your Girlfriend Needs a Divorce, which I follow her on social media, and I encourage you to as well. Lots of great content representing women and helping them to advocate for I lost my place here in your bio. Advocate for themselves during the divorce and custody process is her focus. So she lives in Virginia and practices there. She also grew up there. But Katie decided to enter family law specifically as a result of two abusive relationships. One was in her extended family, and the other was, which really destroyed her entire extended family. And the other was a guy that she dated before she met her husband. And so there's a lot of kind of internal motivation and inspiration around why Katie got into this specific area of law. But I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about divorce and hopefully help educate a few people about, choices that they have and opportunities they can take advantage of.
Yeah. And even though Katie's located in Virginia, she is a wealth of resources. So keep in mind, though, that she is coming from that perspective. But Katie, what do women need to know before divorce to make the best decisions possible?
I think it's really important to get a firm grasp of the laws in your state and keep in mind how much they can vary from state to state. So what you're hearing from a friend or a family member or even your husband is probably not going to be true. You're going to want to, it's fine to listen to it, to have it inform the questions that you're asking when you meet with an attorney, but don't accept anything as true without verifying that it actually is. And I find a lot of women that come into my office are saying, well, I know this is true. And I'm like, no, it's not. And so we have to go through kind of a re-education process. So you do want to make sure that you take the time to get the answers to those questions before you're considering signing a document or before you're even, a lot of people are kind of negotiating behind the scenes with their soon-to-be ex thinking that they're making progress. But if you're coming from a misinformed place, you might be doing more harm than good, because then if you find out the truth and you're, going back on what you said you do, it can disrupt the negotiation process. So I think the most important thing from the beginning is to find out what's true in your state and how that applies in your case.
That is such important advice. And what I see happening a lot is I know people do a ton of research online when they're considering going through a divorce. And they might ask in different online groups or forums or what have you. And I'm always shocked by people responding in those forums without asking for more information. Because a lot of times, as a professional, I'm reading the question and I'm going, there's no way to answer that question with the limited information that's been provided. Right. And here they have all these strangers who are, providing their 2 cents or whatever. But I think it's kind of dangerous, like you're talking about, because when you are acting from a place of misinformation, then that can really throw a wrench into things. And then the other piece of it is I hear, and there's some wonderful, wonderful blogs out there from attorneys all around the country, but somebody will come to me and talk to me about a quote law that they read about, and it's not relevant in their particular situation because, again, it is state specific. So I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I'm in a number of local groups on social media for different moms in different areas, different cities, like near where I live. And there are so many family law questions and so many answers, and a lot of very few attorneys answering the questions. There's 4 or 5 of us, and we're constantly like, no, that's misinformation. Or someone's like, well, I asked ChatGPT and it told me this. It's like, oh God, we've got robots giving answers now. So it is really alarming to see the misinformation and how quickly that can spread. And, if you are looking to the internet for information, you want to make sure that you're looking for things that were, written relatively recently, because even for attorneys, things can be out of date. The law changes frequently.
Absolutely.
So something written recently, ideally that's coming from an attorney and that's coming from someone who is practicing in your state or commonwealth, because it makes a big difference. I mean, California and Virginia, we're not the same. Not the same
Yeah.
at all. So if you're getting some of these things that are, super popular or trending, it's not necessarily going to be the case in your situation, whether it's good news or bad news that you're getting. I don't want you to either celebrate or panic. Just use that as fuel to create the list of questions that you're going to ask when you go meet with an attorney.
Yeah, and the other thing that you said was your spouse giving you misinformation. And I have seen this to some extremes in some cases. I'll give an example. A couple that I worked with where husband told wife that she was not entitled to any of his retirement benefits. And he was a federal employee, and basically most of the marital assets were in fact his retirement benefits between his pension and his TSP account. And he or she had entered this negotiation process thinking that all of that was off the table. And that was pretty eye-opening when she realized, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't beat yourself up, right? Like, I mean, at this point, I've got some 13 years in practice and I'm still learning new things every day. So it's not like because you don't know that you're stupid, but I do think you have to keep in mind that certain people are talking to you with their own best interest in mind and not necessarily
Right.
yours. And I see that kind of the myth around division of retirement, especially, I mean, with military families. You're talking about civil service,
Yes.
but there's some different version of the 10-year myth all over the place. And in Virginia, from the day that you're married, you're entitled to half of what was earned, purchased, or acquired of the retirement, during the marriage, not anything before the marriage, not anything after the marriage, but during the marriage. And that myth it's like a cockroach. It just survives. And I feel like
Yeah.
I'm talking about it all the time and people are still coming to me telling me that they know that they're not entitled to it. And it's like, if the military is telling you that, it's because they're trying to protect the service member or because they genuinely don't know. JAG attorneys aren't licensed to practice in states. They practice military law in the military and handle military cases. They're not, even if they're stationed in Virginia, they are not representing clients in divorce cases in Virginia courts. So they might not know. It's possible, but I think it's probably more likely that they're protecting the service member. And your spouse, he wants to keep it all for himself. So he has a real incentive to provide misinformation. And you're coming into this thinking, this is my husband. We've always been on the same team. And it's hard to have this disconnect where you think, well, we're not on the same team anymore. Actually, we're adverse parties and I need to, treat it as such. So, in the worst cases, I've seen agreements that women have signed that they've waived things that they thought that they weren't entitled to. But it's always a good idea to at least ask the question before you sign something that you can't take away.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up military divorce specifically, Katie, because that is an area of expertise that Hoffmeyer has. But not all law firms have that area of expertise. And there is a lot of nuance around those military benefits. So I wonder if you could just speak to that for a minute and some of the mistakes that you see people making there.
Well, and even in military cases, it changes a lot from state to state. But the problem is that military families especially are kind of trained to rely on military resources. So they're used to thinking that whatever the problem is, there's a military resource out there to handle it. And when it comes to divorce and child custody, these things are handled through the state courts. They're not handled in a military sense at all. So I get women coming in who think that they're entitled to support based on how it would be calculated in the military persons manual, the MILPERSMAN. And that's not the same as how we calculate support in the Virginia courts. And I don't even know why they would provide that in that document, except that, it's some kind of guideline. And if they want to use it in the interim, maybe that provides a benchmark for some people. Mostly I find though that the husbands are not willing to pay support without a court order. So you have to go to court anyway. But I have people coming in thinking that support guidelines look different than they do. And it's hard to tell them, what you've been trained to believe, what you've been trained to trust is not really the
Right.
resource that we want to follow here. We want to talk to, a Virginia attorney or an attorney in the state where, that this particular family is stationed, to figure out what support guidelines are going to look like. And in terms of dividing the military retirement, dividing the TSP, like there are really specific guidelines in place, specific language that has to be addressed. And even in, I think it was 2014 or maybe, that they changed the retirement plans to the new blended retirement
Right.
plan. So things have changed too. So we have kind of seismic shifts within the military itself, but also that impacts state law. And you're going to want to find out, from someone practicing in the state, not a JAG attorney, and certainly not your husband, how to proceed, because the guidance that you're going to get from, military resources is typically flawed at best. Even if those people, I think the people at Fleet and Family and other organizations are genuinely trying to do their best, but there's a lot of regulations and a lot of, red tape, a lot of things to navigate. So you definitely want to talk to an attorney who's experienced in handling military cases. And living where we do, I'm in Hampton Roads, so we have just a very heavy military presence, and we see probably, at least half of our cases, for coming out of the military.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that many. Okay.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And we certainly have the edge. I think a lot of people in our area are handling a lot of military cases just because of, the high
Sure.
concentration, and maybe, other firms in other areas where there's, only, one military base or something. It's not quite as prevalent, but it's kind of everywhere here. And it's really important to get that information and to make sure that you have someone that is familiar with the regulations, because it's complex and it's changing, and you want to make sure that you have all of the things in the agreement before you sign it.
Absolutely. Now, we know that most of the time, if not all the time, you're not going to get 100% of the marital assets. That's just reality. And most of the time, most of the time, it's going to be closer to half. Certainly there are reasons why it may not be, but somewhere in that neighborhood. So how do you know which 50% of the assets that you should really ask for to set yourself up for long-term success?
I think it's always an individual question of priorities. And that can vary from person to person. But I do also think it's a mistake to go all in on, and this is me talking. Obviously, I tell each client, you're in the driver's seat, you're calling the shots. I'm just here to provide information and to make sure that I handle it in the way that you want it handled. But a lot of women come to me and tell me that they want the house, for example, that they want to keep the kids in the school district. They want to keep things, the same and feeling continuous and, not be disrupted in that way. And they're willing to trade off, for example, like a portion of their interest in the retirement for the home. And I do think it's important to consider, when we're talking about investments, we're talking about money long term, that diversification is good, because if the market's hit too hard any one way on any one particular asset, and that's all you've got, it really it can put you in a tricky situation. So if you're considering this, if it's something that you're like, nope, like I don't care what you say, Katie, this is what I'm going to do. At least talk to a financial planner too. I know, Leah, you do a lot of the financial planning work. I don't do any of that myself. I would refer to, someone who is an expert in that field, but to kind of run through the numbers and look at things from a number of different perspectives so that you can make sure that, whether you stay in that house or whether you consider maybe a few other alternatives as you're negotiating your agreement, you're at least considering what that's going to look like for you long term. It's not just, it is, of course, a question of how you're going to live and what life's going to look like when the ink is dry on your final divorce decree. But it's also a question of what things are going to look like 15, 20, 30 years from now. And you want to put yourself in a position where you're not living in poverty in old age, and you're not reeling from some change to the market that you didn't anticipate that really decimates the one asset that you leveraged everything against. So I think diversification is important. I don't like to trade, a variety of things for only one thing. But if you do, if that's something that you're thinking about, then I would recommend, at least meeting with a financial planner and coming up with some scenarios and running the numbers just to make sure that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we do run tons of scenarios for people, and the house has been a really tough issue to deal with for the last few years since interest rates went up, and a lot of people have very low interest rates on their existing mortgage. And so if they have to refinance, it's quite possible that they're refinancing at a significantly higher interest rate. But one of the things we look very closely at is cash flow. And I think that is really the importance of that is underestimated. A lot of times people will say to me, well, if I rent, it's going to be the same as my mortgage, or it's going to cost even more, maybe in some cases, than my mortgage. Well, that might have been your mortgage at the lower interest rate, and that might have been your mortgage before having to take cash out and pay out your spouse. And in addition to that, when you're home, you're responsible for all the maintenance, all the care, all of that. And so factoring all that in, when sometimes you can take that equity out of the house and actually invest it, generate more income for yourself, and then it can actually be a better cash flow perspective. So it's so important to consider, not just the assets, not just the comfort and the safety, which I know when you're going through this difficult life change, it's easy to say, that you just don't want any other change to happen. But it's so important. And I always tell people also that liquid savings cash is really king. It gives you freedom and flexibility. And so if you're giving up all the savings and all the liquidity that you have access to, and then unfortunately I had a client who had a horrible flood in her basement just post-divorce and had given up basically everything to keep the house. And then she didn't have any leverage to actually deal with the flood issue. And then she was worried about mold. And it was a very serious issue. You don't know when that stuff happens. And so really preparing and protecting yourself from some of the unknowns are so important.
Yeah, it's not fun to be house poor, no matter how you say
right.
it. And it's not even just a question of the mortgage and even like the upkeep. Like you said, accidents can happen. A tree can fall on the roof, but you also are still paying all the stuff that goes into that escrow account. So the taxes, the insurance, so it's not even just, can I afford the mortgage? It's, can I afford all of these things? Can I afford to have someone come do the lawn if I can't take care of it myself? And I find a lot of times it's those added expenses that can put you over the top and make you think, well, actually, is this a good idea? Whereas if you went to a rental, maybe the rent is higher than you might like to pay, but you aren't responsible for, maintenance and repairs. And if something were to go wrong, I think we really, we're really stuck on that, the American dream of home ownership in a lot of cases. And there's so many, I feel like I see real estate agents constantly posting like how smart it is to own your home. But I do think you need to consider that renting can be a very, very smart choice too. And so many of these things are individual and based on specific circumstances. And even things like, how much traveling you're doing, how often, are you going to be there to take care of it?
Right.
What kind of custody arrangement do you have? How much space do you need? Can you maintain this without another adult in the house helping you to take care of it or helping you to pay for it? It's a big deal to stay in a house that used to be supported by, two grown adults, maybe even two incomes, and to take that down to one and have, dramatically different financial circumstances and still have it, feel good on a month-to-month basis. And you don't want to go from, stress to stress. When the is over, you want to feel better, not worse. So I think it's, it's just an important consideration. I mean, and not just keeping the house, but all of those things, they're all different pieces of a much larger puzzle. And you want to make sure that you're considering your whole picture altogether and not hyper focusing on one thing that might actually make your life harder rather than easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another thing that I often hear from people is, the custody conversations or the visitation arrangements can be extremely emotional. And sometimes they want to waive their interest in certain assets or take on more liabilities in exchange for maybe more time with their kids, or, what that depends on what that looks like for the given situation.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you tell those clients, Katie?
No, absolutely no. I get it. No, no. I feel like there's very few things in family law that have such a black and white answer, but absolutely do not do that. In Virginia and pretty much everywhere else, custody is modifiable. And the agreement or the court order that you're getting that divides the assets and liabilities is not modifiable. So you're going to be stuck with this financial picture, but the custody picture can change. In Virginia, it's if you have a material change in circumstances, you can file for a modification of custody, visitation, and child support. But that's really it. Everything else is pretty much set in stone once your divorce is finalized. So then if you were to do that, if you were to give away, say, your interest in the retirement or your interest in the home in order to keep primary custody or to have him, relinquish most of his time, then you might find later that not only are you in a difficult financial position, but he's able to continue to file petitions and to try and take more parenting time away from you. And if he's then, well established, he's got a nice, safe, clean home, and you're living out of your car, like it's not difficult to imagine how custody can change. So there's very few absolutes, but I would say absolutely do not waive your interest in anything economic in order to keep more time with your kids, because it can backfire in a way that, puts you in a position where you're destitute and, you don't necessarily get to keep as much parenting time as you might want. So keep custody in custody sphere and the finances in their sphere, and they're separate. But don't let that crossover happen. And I know how tempting it is, because especially if you've been the default parent, the primary caregiver, to imagine that he would take, 30, 40, 50% of the time, it's heartbreaking. It's terrifying. It seems like a logical solution, right? He cares about the money. And if you say, well, I'll back off from this, will he back off from what matters the most to you? But it's a tricky situation. And I would not recommend that you do that.
I couldn't agree more. And it comes up so frequently. And so if you find yourself in that situation and you're contemplating it, listen again to what Katie just said.
Don't. I get it. I'm a mom too. You're a mom too. I get it. And the time I have with my children is precious, and it would be hard to imagine a scenario where you don't have them for Christmas, or dad has a month over the summer, or you're doing week on, week off, or something that feels really impossible. But it's going to feel more impossible if you waive your interest in the assets. It's not going to feel better. So just don't.
So Hoffmeyer has such a wealth of information on the website. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about the resources that people can find there and some of the workshops that you guys host?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's Hoffheimer, but totally fine. I get it. It's a hard one to say. But yeah, our whole shtick, I mean, we've been around since the early 90s, not me personally, obviously, I'm way too young. But we've been around since the early 90s, and the big goal has always been to provide education. And so the firm founder, Charlie Hoffheimer, originally in the early days wrote a book, What Every Virginia Woman Needs to Know About Divorce. And his daughter was practicing with him at the time, and then she added a custody book, and then we had an attorney for a while who worked with us who wrote one on military divorce, and then I added one after I started in 2011 on hiring the right attorney. And since that time, Charlie's retired. Kristen, unfortunately, passed away. So we have and laws have changed, right? So we have revised all of those books. We have, a number of different versions from where they originally existed, but 4 free books that Virginia women can download to kind of, really women everywhere, can download just to kind of get an idea about how the law works in Virginia. And I mean, I think even for someone who is coming into this not in Virginia, reading the book or, reading some other resources can at least bring up red flags in your mind. Well, I need to ask about this. I need to ask about that. I hadn't considered this. What's going to happen to that? So that you can ask an attorney in your state exactly how it will work for you. But there are so many things you just don't know about family law and divorce if you haven't been through it. And even if you have, things have probably changed. So it's a good idea to at least brush up on that. But we have the 4 free books. We have a number of free reports. We have, a whole series on special issues in custody and visitation, like relocation, reunifications, sexual and physical abuse of children. We have working with guardian ad litems, how to handle social media, one about collaborative divorce. And we have 2 seminars, one on divorce and one on child custody. The divorce one we do every month and the custody one quarterly. And they're all, the books, the reports are all free. We got, thousands of pages of blogs. And the seminars are pretty low cost, especially compared to the cost of meeting with an attorney, just to help answer those questions. The nice thing about the seminars too, they're taught live on Zoom these days, but we handle questions and answers. They're all taught by one of our attorneys, and we answer the questions live as you go, so that if there is something that is just keeping you lying awake at night that you can't stop worrying about, and you want to ask how it applies or how the law applies to your specific situation, you can ask those questions and you can get real answers without paying the cost of a consult. So we're pretty proud of those resources. They've been kind of things that we've been evolving for a long time, some of them. And it's kind of our way to give back. We're not, paid for doing the seminars. It's extra time on top of our regular caseloads that we take out to do the seminars and to answer the questions. And it's really, for me, I feel like it's affirming work. Like talking to these people and giving them answers when they're at this like crisis point and helping guide them to see what's going to be best for them and best for their kids. I mean, that's what it's all about to me. So I love doing them. I love hearing the questions. I love knowing what people are asking, so that I can make sure to, draft a blog on it, to do social media posts on it, to make sure to share that information in a wider sense. Because if one person has a question or something's not clear to one woman, then it's not clear to a bunch of others. They're just not asking because they're too scared, or they don't even know if they should ask it. So
right.
I would definitely check it out if you're interested, whether you're in Virginia or not. Of course, the law that we cite is specific to Virginia, but the issues are not. The issues come up in cases all across the country. So just being able to have a better handle on, say, how breastfeeding is handled in a custody and visitation case, and, having that inform the questions that you're asking to an attorney in your state can be really helpful. And if you want to check it out or get more information, the URL for the law firm is hoflaw.com. That's HOFLAW.com. And we're really proud of it. So check it out and let me know what you think. I always love to hear feedback from people.
That's fantastic. And we will include that link in the show notes. So be sure to check out those resources. And I mentioned that Katie's on social media. Where can people find you on social media, Katie?
Yeah, I do much of the social media, much of the, the blogs and the articles and things for the firm at Hoff Law. But I also started Your Girlfriend Needs a Divorce, and I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and kind of sharing videos and tips and tricks and things that I think people should know. This is a new project for me. It was just something I got to this point where I was just like, I have so much more to say. I have so much more to say. And I felt like there was nothing I could do but just get it out there by whatever means necessary. And that's kind of how it started. And I've been sharing content on my own, both with the firm and on my own for, I don't know, 9 months now. 9 months I've been doing it. And it's been really fun to talk to people. Like family law, you know how it is. Like, it's not like everybody's liking or sharing your stuff. You see the views,
right,
but you don't see as much activity because people are nervous. But I'm getting tons of direct messages from women going through this, all throughout the world. I've gotten questions from people in other countries, and it's really neat to be able to connect with people. And I'm following other influencers who are working in the space too, trying to change laws to make things more egalitarian, to help women have equal access to the justice system. And it's inspiring to see what other people are doing and to hear about cases in other states and what other moms are going through. And it just all kind of helps inform a wider perspective. So I've been excited to do it. It's been a real passion project of mine.
That's fantastic. So you can find Katie everywhere.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, it's a little different. I'm trying to do it a little differently on all the different platforms because the same content doesn't work well everywhere. Some places like more video. Some people like less video does better. But just trying to share the information because it's so important. With divorce, you only get one shot. And
That's right.
custody visitation might be modifiable, but you want to make sure that you are as informed as possible, because you might have an attorney, you might not, but you are your first and best advocate. And the more you know, the more you can inform your attorney, and the more you can advocate for the things that are important to you and important for your children. And that's priceless.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing so much wisdom with our audience. This has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely my pleasure. And for those of you who are listening, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me on Intentional Divorce Insights. It's a privilege to share this time with you. I hope each episode offers valuable guidance to navigate your journey. If you find our content helpful, please leave a review to help others discover the benefits of intentional decision-making in divorce. Until next time, take care and continue to embrace your path with intention.